Our next speaker is Pamela Scott, who is an independent architectural historian who specializes in the history of Washington's planning and built environment. She has taught the history of Washington architecture at several universities and curated exhibitions at the Library of Congress, here at the National Building Museum, Capitol Historical Society of Washington, and the Department of Interior Museum on topics ranging about Washington's history. She lectures frequently on many aspects of Washington's public buildings and their symbolism at scholarly meetings and at museums and historical societies. She's received fellowships from the Winchester Museum, the U.S. Capitol Historical Society, and the White House Historical Association. Her books include exhibition catalogs, such as Temple of Liberty, archival compilations, such as directories of District of Columbia architects and builders, guidebooks, such as Buildings of the District of Columbia, and scholarly works, including Designing the Nation's Capital, the 1901 Plan for Washington, D.C. Her book on the U.S. Treasury Building's history is forthcoming. Her talk today is entitled The Improvement of Washington City, Charles Moore and the Monumental Corps. Please welcome Pam Scott.
Thank you very much, and good morning. They misread history, who see in the location of the seat of government at Washington only the clever bargain of scheming politicians. Charles Moore began his introduction to Glenn Brown's History of the United States Capitol. Moore went on to write about the ideal that existed in the minds of the founding fathers, noting that the beginning of the Capitol building in 1793 meant that throughout the land the idea prevailed that a permanent government had been established, that progress was assured, that law would be enforced and property be safe. Such ringing prose is not surprising, for 22 years earlier, Moore's first career was as a journalist. He also wrote with authority about the historical context of each stage of the Capitol's history, from the 1790s through the 1860s. This show of expertise is again not surprising, because in 1900, Moore earned a doctoral degree in history from Columbia College, now George Washington University. Moore was born in Ypsilanti, Michigan, just west of Detroit in 1855, his parents migrating there when it was still the frontier. His mother's family was from Old New England stock, Puritan stock. His father's family was Scots-Irish. Moore was doubly proud of his early American ancestry and that his parents were pioneers on the western frontier. The ideas and ideals of the founding fathers about the federal city guided Moore's entire career in Washington. In the preface to his 1926 book, Family Life of George Washington, Moore recounted that as a child, a visitor from Virginia took him on his knee and said, "When I was your age, I sat on George Washington's knee." Thus, from his boyhood, the romance of history reached out and touched him in an electrifying way, and as he grew older, so did his desire to visit the city of Washington. Moore's parents died when he was 14, and his guardian sent him to New England to be educated. During the summer of 1872, he traveled to Washington, arriving in the midst of great urban upheaval, as the Board of Public Works under Alexander Shepard was in the midst of modernizing the city's infrastructure and beautifying its streetscapes. In his voluminous writings and lectures, Moore occasionally referred to his initial experience of Washington as coinciding with the city's first rebirth. In his 1924 article on the governance of Washington, Moore wrote, "General Grant was president. He was accustomed to large expenditures to accomplish large results, and waste had no terrors for him." In Alexander R. Shepard, President Grant found the man ruthlessly to lift Washington into the rank of a city. Boss Shepard had the training of a plumber, the nerve of a captain of finance, the ingenuity of the devil, and the vision of a seer. Before Congress could catch up with him and abolish him in his improvised government, he had accomplished his task. From his day dates a new heaven and a new earth for the national capital. As its chronicler and an active participant in the formulating the Senate Park Commission, I can't see, there we go, followed by 30 years serving on the Commission of Fine Arts, Moore firmly believed he was participating in Washington's second Renaissance, one that was based in George Washington's original vision of what America's capital should be. But there was a prior and potent influence on Moore's aesthetic education. Moore graduated from Harvard College in 1878, where he studied with Charles Eliot Norton, Harvard's first professor of the history of art. In his typescript biography of Norton, Moore quoted Norton's son, who wittily and aptly called his father's courses Lectures on Modern Morals, as illustrated by the Art of the Ancients. Moore went on to cite examples of Norton's influence as a teacher, his manifestations of a sway which came to be accounted by many as the determining influence in their lives, among whom he considered himself. Norton insisted in Moore's words that ethos was a fundamental element of beauty in art, a classical concept that very much influenced Moore's contributions to the reborn Washington and his writings about it. In his 1930 article, Standards of Taste, Moore quoted Norton at length. In a complete scheme of university studies, the history of the fine arts in the relationship to social progress, to general culture, and to literature should find a place. Moreover, according to Norton, the visual arts were, next to literature, the most important modes of expression of the sentiments, beliefs, and opinions of men, as well as evincing the moral temper and intellectual culture of the various races by whom they have been practiced. Most importantly for Moore was Norton's dictum, we need to quicken the sense of connection between the present generation and the past, to develop the conviction that culture is but the name for that inheritance, alike material and moral, that we have received from our predecessors, and which we are to transmit with such additions as we can make to it, to our successors. Every sentence in Norton's prose about European culture is clear, elegant, apposite, and often epigrammatic. The same is true of Moore's writings, but Moore's were born of the impulse to prove that American democracy fostered artistic, cultural, and historical life as rich as Europe's, a view that Norton had questioned in the 1870s. After graduating from Harvard, Moore moved to Detroit, where he worked as a journalist. His writings soon brought him to the attention of businessman James McMillan, who had served several years experience modernizing Detroit's urban infrastructure in his municipal positions, including on the city's Board of Park Commissioners. When McMillan was elected to the Senate in 1889, he brought Moore with him to Washington as his secretary, and both applied Moore's urban expertise to modernizing Washington via his chairmanship of the Senate Committee on the District of Columbia. Moore drafted the congressional reports on each of the projects McMillan sponsored relating to modern municipal services during the 1890s. Moore came to realize that federal patronage of the arts was the key to realizing a national legacy of monumental works by which participants would judge, posterity would judge America's ideals and achievements. Late in his life, Moore quoted part of Thomas Jefferson's letter to James Madison concerning changes to Jefferson's design for the Virginia state capitol. Moore wrote, "The spirit of that architecture in which Jefferson relied as, quote, the laying out of money for something honorable, this satisfaction of proof of national good taste, impressed Moore very much." Had he quoted further Jefferson's preceding sentence, it would have perhaps been more apt. Jefferson said, "But how is the taste of this beautiful art to be formed in our countrymen unless we avail ourselves of every occasion when public buildings are to be erected, or presenting to them models for their study and imitation?" In 1930, Moore described Washington as an outward and visible sign of the inward and spiritual grace of the Republic. Moore's writings vis-a-vis his roles in the events he witnessed, participated in, or directed in Washington from 1889 until he retired in 1940, were written to convince a broad American audience to support improvements to Washington. In fact, in a letter to his editor in 1929, Moore noted that he wrote to promote those projects that interested him. He was an inspired public relations propagandist, who combined a passionate belief in his cause as incisive, logical, who combined a passionate belief in his cause, an incisive, logical mind, and great clarity of expression. By January 18, 1901, McMillan was ready to declare that his next step was to make Washington a beautiful capital city. Moore proved to be his perfect aide. His Senate report, innocuously titled "Commission to Consider Certain Improvements in the District of Columbia," began modestly. During the past decade, Congress has provided the means for artistic development of the District of Columbia in a manner befitting the capital city of the nation. After praising Congress, Moore noted, "Each of these new enterprises is essentially useful to the health and well-being of the thousands of people who live in Washington and to thousands upon thousands of people who for longer or shorter terms visit their capital city." Thus, at its outset, the report established two fundamental strategic positions. The work of congressmen must be recognized and praised, and the District of Columbia belonged to the nation, with all of America benefiting from its improvement. Moore invoked in the report the remarkable success achieved at the Chicago World's Fair of 1893, which shows how an artistic plan may be devised and carried out so as to be a source of national pride and a means of national education. Moore argued that what had been achieved temporarily in the midst of a commercial city may be realized permanently in this non-commercial capital city. Moore assured Congress that McMillan had laid the groundwork and that the President McKinley had but to make a request for men who have attained the highest rank in their professions to receive a quick response dictated by a patriotic desire to place their expertise and abilities at the service of the country in beautifying the capital. Moore noted in his 1923 personal recollections that he had once traveled with McKinley in a private car 2 years before he was elected president. When the Senate Park Commission members first assembled in Washington, Moore took them to the White House to be introduced to McKinley. Many people commented that Moore possessed the gift of friendship. Fundamental to his success throughout his career was that he was the quintessential clubman with an entree to the highest political, academic, intellectual, and business circles. Remarkably, he was comfortable in all of them equally, and it is how he accomplished as much as he did in a very productive life. The McMillan-Moore January 1901 congressional report concluded with a lengthy statement by Glenn Brown. His overview focused on describing L'Enfant's original intentions of a unified monumental city, its core arranged in an L shape with the public grounds connecting the Capitol and the President's house. Moore sorrowfully noted that in after years, the buildings and park treatment were delegated to separate individuals who appear to have thought their own project the only one to be considered. Now was the time, Brown concluded, on the 100th anniversary of the foundation of the Capitol, to consider a new plan that would build on the principles established during the 1790s. Moore was well equipped to advise McMillan that Daniel Burnham should lead the Senate Park Commission on the beautification of Washington. For 6 years earlier, Moore edited, probably largely wrote, Burnham's The Organization, Design, and Construction of the Fair. So Moore's firsthand knowledge of Burnham's abilities as both a visionary and thinker and an inspired organizer of other artists was known to him. 15 years later, he also edited, again basically wrote, Burnham's Plan of Chicago, a much more significant publication. By mid-March, the three key Park Commission members, Burnham, New York architect Charles Fulham McKim, and Boston landscape architect Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. met in Washington. McMillan told them to give their imaginations free rein, and they quickly conceived their plan's key elements in short monthly meetings before they embarked in mid-June for several weeks in Europe. There they looked all day and discussed half the night what would best work in Washington as they visited cities and country estates in 6 countries to validate their initial ideas and modify them. Moore was with them every step of the way. He handled all the logistics of their Washington meetings and attended at least many parts of many of them. He accompanied them on their 2 trips to the Chesapeake Bay Trowns during the spring of 1901 in search of American precedents for L'Enfant's plan. And as an observer who quickly was accepted as a member of the team on their European travels, Moore received an intense education on how the integration of landscape, architecture, and public sculpture in the hands of experts results in great places. Although Moore and other key officials were on vacation in August when the team returned from Europe, Moore remained in constant touch, especially with McKim, as the commission members made their final decisions about their 5-point plan. The White House Capitol in Washington monument was the basic structure, with 2 new monuments, both to be triumphal arches, proposed to terminate the west and south axes of their plan's outline. The political furor concerning the Commission's initial decision to honor Ulysses S. Grant at the mall's west end and Lincoln with a smaller memorial arch at the tidal basin was quickly resolved by Secretary of War Elihu Root and Secretary of State John Hay. Moving Lincoln to the west end of the mall and placing the Grant Memorial Commission's planned sculptural group at the foot of Capitol Hill left the tidal basin site in limbo. McKinley's assassination and Theodore Roosevelt's ascension to the presidency in mid-September seemed to offer a solution, as they hastily grouped 6 White House clones to frame a modern version of the Roman Pantheon, loosely dedicated to the Founding Fathers. This was an architecturally much more robust ensemble than McKinley sanctioned, who had admonished the park commissioners not to spoil the view from the Blue Room. These final decisions seem to have been made without any or little input from Moore, who was busily composing 2 articles promoting the Commission's plan while it was still being refined. Both were to be published in the Century magazine soon after the plan's scheduled launch at the beginning of January. Part of Moore's carefully orchestrated public relations campaign to promote nationwide Washington's improvements. Other efforts included Brown enlisting all the AIA chapters to publish the plan locally, lectures given by several of the Park Commission's key players, including Moore and Brown, and traveling exhibits of the spectacular watercolors made under McKim's supervision, all specifically undertaken to sway public opinion about the possible future beauty of the nation's capital. The first of Moore's Century magazine papers, as he identified them to signify their seriousness, was entitled The Improvement of Washington City, published in February 1902. It began with a more detailed account of the federal city's founding history than had yet appeared in popular journals. His goal was to provide an historically reliable context for L'Enfant's plan in preparation for arguing the legitimacy of the Senate Park Commission's expansion of it. Particularly important to all the participants was to counteract the prevailing ad hoc placement of government buildings, like James G. Hill's government printing office on North Capitol Street, wrongly located in such a prominent site simply because of its proximity to railroad transport facilities and its main distribution point, the Capitol. Of equal concern was the vestigial Victorian character of contemporary red brick buildings, like the printing office, about which Moore and the Park Commission were more circumspect. By promoting public architecture steeped in the neoclassicism of the White House and the Capitol, the Commission avoided criticizing directly the work of architects like Hill still in practice, as well as Adolph Cluse, who designed 4 buildings on the mall the Commission was adamant about replacing. Moore wrote, in a word, L'Enfant planned the capital city as a work of art in which each feature should have a distinct relation to every other feature, and thus he gave to the scheme that feeling of unity which today excites the interest and admiration of the visitor to Paris. After a brief overview of the Civil War, in which only T.U. Walter's Capitol Dome was praised, Moore reiterated the Commission's major theme. The one thing lacking in the development of the capital has been that unity for which L'Enfant strove. He then embarked on a communal exercise of imaginings based on the grisaille half-tone copies of a few of the Commission's watercolors made especially to illustrate the articles. Let one imagine himself standing on the western terrace of the Capitol on a summer afternoon was a particularly effective literary device to draw readers into the Park Commission's vision of the Mall reborn. Of the article's 5 illustrations, one was the bird's eye panorama of the Mall looking east with the Washington Monument Gardens in the foreground, and 2 were close-up views of the gardens. Will these plans, developed after much study by competent men, be carried out? Time, that is for Congress to determine, but there is good reason to believe that the work will begin at once. Moore mentioned works already under consideration, the new Agriculture Department, new Potomac River bridges, congressional office buildings. Without directly urging readers to write their congressmen in support of the plan, Moore's allusions to the growing conviction that the city had come to develop Washington, that the day had come to develop Washington according to a well-considered plan, encouraged right-minded readers to support such magnificent changes to their national capital. He ended by assuring his readers that no great sums of money would be needed, and that routine appropriations for new government buildings would be spent according to a unified plan instead of the present haphazard system. Moore's last sentence concluded that if the new buildings and parks were developed according to a definite system, the result must follow that the capital of the United States, already beautiful in situation, will stand as one of the most beautiful cities in the world. Moore's draft originally ended with the most beautiful city in the world, but McKim suggested that he add one of the, commenting that if that were true, wouldn't it be good enough? Moore's occasional hyperbole when writing about the Commission's plan, both during its formative period and when he was crucially involved in seeing that many of its individual parts were carried out, was nothing less than high rhetoric. He came to realize that high ideals were often, perhaps best, expressed in resounding language, just as the idealized visions represented by the architecture of Burnham's Union Station, complemented by Louis St. Gaudens's allegorical sculptural cycle, The Progress of Railroading, of Henry Bacon's Lincoln Memorial, with Jules Guérin's murals representing emancipation and reunion, were visual rhetoric. They were idealized concepts expressed in architecture, sculpture, and painting to transcend the events and eras they portrayed, leaving behind the blood, sweat, and tears that accomplished them in order to glorify their final achievements. Each expressed society's collective experience of great triumphs rather than the pain and hardship of individuals. These artworks all escape being utterly pretentious because their artists learned from buildings deemed classics how they worked on aesthetic, physical, and metaphorical levels. Moreover, Burnham and St. Gaudens, Bacon and Guérin were serious in their intent to make America's great achievements, conquering the continent, preserving the Union, timeless within the context of all the world's great accomplishments. For 4 decades, Moore unwaveringly insisted that the founding of the federal city as the repository of American government was its most important historical fact. He believed Washington's soul had been lost during the Victorian period and could be, must be, recovered by America's best artists, designing modern classical buildings to house the government, honor the 19th century's great events, and accommodate future ones. Moore began his second century magazine paper with an historical overview of Georgetown, the federal city's neighborhood in the 1790s when L'Enfant was designing the city, because he wanted to convince the public that the Park Commission was planning several features benefiting residential Washington. He emphasized the city's unique socio-political life for retired professionals, the only city in the country where a man may have an interest in what is going on without himself actively engaged in any pursuit. I actually believe Moore was extending a covert invitation to families of means to settle in Washington to increase the WASP population to balance the city's large African American, German, and Irish communities. In March 1901, McKim wrote Moore about their common ancestry and the tie they shared in advancing a great enterprise. It is also pleasant to reflect that Uncle Sam, when dealing with his really serious problems, turns to the Scotch-Irish for support, McKim wrote. Most of McKim's second paper promoted the Park Commission's additions to the District of Columbia's extensive system of public parks, particularly Fort Drive, that would have been Washington's emerald necklace. It connected not just the Civil War forts with Recreational Drive, but also planned outlying facilities, such as municipal hospitals that benefited from country rather than urban settings. Curiously, 6 of the second paper's 7 illustrations were again views to, from, and within the monument gardens, the most visionary and controversial part of the Commission's plan and closest to McKim's heart. Senator McMillan died unexpectedly on August 10, 1902, and within a few months, Moore returned to Detroit, where he was in business, acted as a director of the Detroit Institute of Art, and was employed as a city planner. He maintained close ties with Burnham, McKim, and Olmsted, and in 1905 was made an honorary member of Roosevelt's Consultative Board of Architects, its primary goal to promote the values and projects of the Senate Park Commission. The greatest measure of respect of his Washington colleagues was naming Moore the only lay member of the Commission of Fine Arts when it was founded in 1910, a position he held throughout his tenure there until 1940, but he was elected its chairman by his colleagues in 1915. Moore did not return permanently to live in Washington until 1918, when he accepted an appointment as acting chief of the manuscript division at the Library of Congress. There, he promptly began seeking out and acquiring the papers of many important Americans, concentrating on all the presidents. Moore was particularly assiduous in finding and saving Washington's history. For example, in 1920, he acquired L'Enfant's papers from James Dudley Morgan. 7 years later, Moore resigned from the library to devote all of his time and energy to realizing the Park Commission plan. From the first meeting of the Arts Commission in 1910, Moore dedicated his political and literary skills to ensuring that the Park Commission's plan be realized. As Moore wrote in his 1929 biography of McKim, the plan of 1901 was placed in the hands of its friends. Because Burnham was appointed its chairman, McKim was represented posthumously by 2 architects, Thomas Hastings and Cass Gilbert, who had worked in his office, and Olmsted was its landscape commissioner. 5 buildings on the Park Commission plan were completed or underway when the Arts Commission was convened in 1910. Today's National History Museum, the Agriculture Department building, Union Station, and the House and Senate office buildings. Only the latter 2 could be considered part of a unified composition, the others widely scattered, with seemingly little hope of their ever being part of their intended composition on the Mall. Thus, the enormous challenge ahead was coaxing into being the Open Vista Mall with the Lincoln Memorial at its west end, the parklands continued across the Potomac via Memorial Bridge, the several executive department buildings in the Mall Triangle, conforming future mall museums, the Tidal Basin Monument, and the Washington Monument Gardens. Each had to be addressed individually, and each faced opposition or alternative proposed sites or solutions. But with the exception of the Monument Gardens, each was substantially, as the Park Commission envisaged, was built as substantially as the Park Commission envisaged their forms and scales on their specified sites. Moore was the moving force that accomplished this staggering task. The Lincoln Memorial was the first great project that the Arts Commission considered. Its complex history of alternative sites during the century's first decade endangering a critical element of the Park Commission's mandate. When the Lincoln Memorial Commission was created in February 1911, its chairman was President Taft, who had strongly supported the Park Commission during its active years. He was also responsible for requiring the Lincoln Commission to consult with the Arts Commission about the placement of the Lincoln and the selection of its artists. Moore's literary and organizational abilities again coincided in his draft of the combined opinions expressed by fellow members of the Arts Commission during 5 meetings held during the spring and early summer of 1911. Moore was at his most incisive, the elegance of his language suiting the clarity of his logic that Congress's appropriation of $2 million suggests that the memorial is intended to be a structure of large size. The popular idea of a memorial to Lincoln will be satisfied only with a design which combines grandeur with beauty. Assuming that this memorial must be a large one, there are few sites on which it can be placed successfully, for it is important that a large monument shall stand where its environment can be specially designed to harmonize with it, and where the design need not be controlled or even influenced by existing surroundings. The report went on to consider dispassionately various Capitol Hill and West Potomac Park sites within the framework that the Commission had established. This was a delicate situation because Burnham, who signed the report as the Commission's first chairman, had been actively involved in promoting Union Station's plaza or the Capitol grounds for the Lincoln Memorial, much to the dismay of his Park Commission colleagues. While other participants in the 1901 plan, principally Olmsted and Brown, were quite outspoken about Burnham's defection, Moore, in his work with the Arts Commission and in his biography of Burnham, excused Burnham's words, actions, and drawings made over a 2-year period as a misunderstanding. The Arts Commission unanimously approved the Potomac Park site for the Lincoln and initially supported an open competition, but the members were divided over the composition of the jury, solely artists or to include government officials and other experts. The compromise was to recommend appointment of the memorial's architect and sculptor. Since the Art Commission's report was advisory only, the Lincoln Commission held a limited competition for designs on prominent sites, including ones overlooking the monumental core. Burnham favored Henry Bacon because he considered him closest to in spirit to McKim, and would design the Lincoln Memorial as his master would have done had he not died in 1909. Moore later wrote in his memoirs, "The selection of Bacon as architect and the approval of his plans by the Lincoln Commission gave to the Commission of Fine Arts an established standing at this crucial juncture." The Arts Commission closely monitored the Lincoln Memorial's development because 4 Corps of Engineers officers in charge of its construction also served as the Art Commission's secretaries and dispersing officers. As the memorial was nearing completion in 1922, a long-term disagreement between the Commission and the War Department concerning Memorial Bridge's location and design were resolved, but not amicably. Revival in 1911 of the Memorial Bridge project again centered, as it had in 1901, on whether a lofty highway bridge would connect Arlington with the district at the bluffs occupied by the Naval Hospital, the National Observatory site, or via a low memorial bridge, its landfall on the west side of the Lincoln Memorial. The Corps favored the highway bridge. And in 1901, the Commission had won the battle for a low-profile Roman aqueduct bridge, the solution that was again promoted by the Art Commission when they advised the Lincoln Memorial Commission in 1911. The complicating factor in 1911 was also present in 1922. The same Corps of Engineers officer who was the Secretary of the Art Commission, Colonel Spencer Cosby in 1911, was also the executive officer of the Arlington Memorial Bridge Commission. Colonel Clarence Sherrill was the executive and dispersing officer for both commissions in 1922, acting as the liaison between the Secretary of War, the Chief of Engineers, President Warren G. Harding, who was head of the Memorial Bridge Commission, Moore, now Chairman of the Arts Commission. The Corps' list of 10 pragmatic reasons in favor of the high bridge connecting the Virginia Highlands directly to downtown Washington via New York Avenue extended convinced all the members of the Bridge Commission. However, they directed Sherrill to solicit the views of the Arts Commission and to emphasize that it was especially desired to have this bridge of a design that will be entirely harmonious with the Lincoln Memorial. Moore's response was to counter each of the Corps' 10 points compiled from information and attitudes written by each of his members. Moore had already informed Olmsted, the sole remaining member of the Park Commission, that the problem is being treated entirely from an engineering standpoint with no attention to park or memorial features. Olmsted's response was included in Moore's report. He said in 1901 the Park Commission had considered the bridge one of the plan's most conspicuous features, intimately related for good or for ill to the Lincoln Memorial. James Greenleaf, the current landscape architect commissioner, wrote Moore that the bridge was not a local city problem of utilitarian nature. It is a memorial. The bridge's memorial nature had often been debated during its long and convoluted history. But in 1922, it was considered to be the Lincoln-Lee Bridge, a metaphorical as well as a physical link between the North and the South. It was at this point, midsummer of 1922, that the secretaryship of the Arts Commission passed to a civilian, Paul Kammerer. Apparently, conflicts of interest for engineers serving simultaneously as executive officers on more than one commission that might have rival goals became apparent. Sherrill's heart and mind were definitely allied with the War Department and the Corps of Engineers on the bridge issue. Moreover, Sherrill was a native of North Carolina and an officer of the Robert E. Lee Memorial Highway Commission. On September 7, 1922, Morrill sent Sherrill as executive officer of the Bridge Commission the Arts Commission's report, acknowledging that it is true that the plan of 1901 is not binding on any official or any commission. However, this plan has been carried out as to a majority of its elements. Therefore, no change in an essential remaining element should be made for reasons that will not clearly command themselves. Moore's answers to Sherrill's 10 points, compiled with the help of the commission members, considered each of Sherrill's points from river traffic Moore claimed most was done via towed barges to congested traffic at the Lincoln Roundabout. Moore contended more serious traffic jams would occur on 17th Street. Moore countered Sherrill's conclusion that the two alternatives, the subordination of the memorial is to be chosen, the bridge being more important. Moore's response was that the bridge would be subordinate to the Lincoln Memorial only in the sense that the Union Station is subordinate to the Capitol, both being parts of one great scheme of capital improvement, and each taking its appropriate place in that scheme. Because Moore feared that hidden forces were at work somewhere, he sent copies of the Art Commission's report to newspapers, contrary to the established protocol vis-a-vis confidentiality between federal commissions. Sherrill wrote Moore an icy letter on September 12, the day large sections of Moore's report were published on the front page of the Evening Star. This is somewhat surprising, for on September 7, the day Moore wrote the report, the Washington Post quoted Sherrill, who had attended a meeting of the Lee Association the day before. Quote, "The proposal for the Lincoln-Lee Memorial Bridge across the Potomac was outlined by Colonel Clarence O. Sherrill, Superintendent of Public Buildings and Grounds, and officer of the association. The plan," he said, "called for extending New York Avenue and construction of the Lee Highway through Falls Church into Washington. Congress had appropriated funds for the bridge and plans for its erection will be completed in a year, according to Colonel Sherrill. The Star's headline, followed by 3 subheads, explain why Sherrill was so angry. He had been outmaneuvered. Arts Commission turns down site for new bridge. Exhaustive argument holds New York Avenue would destroy whole scheme. Would sever access from Capitol to Arlington. Lincoln Memorial location best. Communication sent to Colonel Sherrill declares. Sherrill complained to President Harding, who wrote more, "I do not think the Bridge Commission has been treated in this manner in accordance with good ethics," and advised more that in the future he bring his problems to him and not the press. During the next 3 months, Moore mended many, but not all fences. On December 18, 1922, the Evening Star's headline and 3 subheads relieved most people of the obligation of reading the whole article. Lincoln Memorial selected as site for new bridge. President and others make personal inspection before giving decision. Structure will run to Arlington Cemetery. Plan to extend New York Avenue, abandoned. In response to, the Star article concluded, in response to one suggestion made during the general discussion that the bridge should be run from the Lincoln Memorial through the Arlington Cemetery because of the spiritual effect it will have upon those who made the journey as a connecting link between these 2 great American shrines. Mr. Harding said he did not think it so much a spiritual link as the artistic link that was to be made. This response surely reveals Moore's influence. In his memoirs, Moore recounted that when Coolidge returned home and told his wife that Moore had won the Battle of the Bridge, she asked, "Did you help him?" And Coolidge replied, "No, he didn't need it." But Sherrill was not pacified. He was quoted as saying in 1925, "We have got to get rid of that Fine Arts Commission, for Charles Moore won't let me do what I want to." Sherrill asked the Arts Commission to suggest possible bridge designers, and he chose William Mitchell Kendall, chief designer for McKim, Mead & White, who made several stunning drawings within the tradition of McKim's own sketch, recorded in pencil on one of the plans the commission apparently took with them to Europe more than 20 years earlier. Realizing the Park Commission's mall triangle of office buildings begun in 1911, when the government purchased the land on 15th Street facing the Ellipse, and the Art Commission approved plans for offices for 3 executive departments. In April 1916, after a conversation with Moore and other Art Commission members, Cass Gilbert, the designer of the 1911 Justice Department building, wrote Senator Francis Newlands about forming a public buildings commission to address the government's serious space needs. This sideways approach was necessary because the Art Commission had no legal authority to initiate such actions, only to evaluate the suitability of sites and designs proposed by others. Yet Moore felt it was crucial that they monitor such a large-scale building campaign because many other contenders also wished to have decisive voices. When a new government agency to oversee public buildings was being discussed, Moore told Newlands that he feared the head of a new or special department might be a cubist, a futurist, or a mullet. They really disliked State War and Navy building, recommending instead a commission composed of experts that would be answerable to review by the Arts Commission. The long and complex history of designing and building the Federal Triangle includes many interventions by the Art Commission, including its advice to the new Public Buildings Commission that the architectural precedents established by the government's early office buildings, Treasury, the Patent Office, General Post Office, determine the architectural styles of the new buildings. This cursory overview demonstrates that Moore would resort to direct, indirect, and even chancy ways to ensure that all the Park Commission's important elements be implemented. He began his October 1922 lecture before the Garden Club of America Washington, once known as the city of magnificent distances, may now be termed the city of magnificent possibilities. In spite of its century and a quarter of years, it is still a city of beginnings. Nothing is completed. Everything is begun. It is a city of transitions. He was preparing the groundwork for his assault on the Botanic Garden at the east end of the mall, part of a long campaign to clear away all the remnants of A.J. Downing's picturesque grounds. Moore proposed moving the Botanical Garden to Mount Hamilton off of Bladensburg Road, which had a commanding view of the district. He may well have had in mind the location of Kew Gardens in relationship to London, its extent possible because of its suburban location, a model for larger public botanical gardens in Washington. Congress established the National Arboretum at Mount Hamilton in 1927, and the Botanic Gardens' French-inspired orangery was begun in 1931, south of Maryland Avenue, leaving the mall's central axis marked only by the Washington Monument between the Capitol and the Lincoln Memorial. The Theodore Roosevelt Memorial Foundation was founded in March 1919, 2 months after his death. One of its goals to build a memorial in Washington. Edith Roosevelt, a long-term friend of Moore's, told him that both she and her husband long opposed a monument to him in a prominent position in relation to the plan of Washington, that they both considered it the city of George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, and that lesser persons should be commemorated there only after time had shown their right to such commemoration. But the Roosevelt Memorial Association, which had raised nearly $2 million, felt the memorial should be associated with the plan of Washington and suggested 3 sites in preparation for a design competition, their favored one south of the Washington Monument on axis with the White House. Because Moore felt that the Roosevelt Memorial Association was misrepresenting Roosevelt's role in the formulation of the Senate Park Commission plan in their arguments for this important site, he wrote an article, Theodore Roosevelt's Service to the National Capital, published in Architecture magazine. Although Moore and the Arts Commission favored a 16th Street site for the Roosevelt Memorial, they were forced to continue commenting on and finally reviewing designs submitted to the 1926 Commission. Specifically speaking for himself and not the Arts Commission, Moore was quoted in Washington newspapers as being against the Roosevelt Memorial there because it should not, in his opinion, be dedicated to any individual, but to the Founding Fathers. This was, of course, what the Park Commission had planned for the tidal basin in 1901. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip over this and go directly to the Jefferson Memorial. On April 13, 1902, dismayed that the Senate Park Commission had not provided for a memorial to the third president, both Republican and Democratic members of Congress, as well as private citizens, formed the Thomas Jefferson Memorial Association. Arguably, Jefferson had done as much towards the development of the national capital as L'Enfant or Washington. In 1934, Congress authorized the Thomas Jefferson Memorial Commission, ironically spurred by the election of Franklin D. Roosevelt, a Democrat who admired Jefferson the most among America's early leaders. Within a year, the Jefferson Commission chose Pope as their architect and his design for the tidal basin, one of 4 proposed on different sites within the city. It was based on the Roman Pantheon and remarkably similar to the Park Commission's Founding Fathers Memorial, but in Pope's hands, slightly modified, much larger, and located within a rigidly geometric landscape setting. Pope, who had served on the Arts Commission from 1917 until 1922, was America's leading Beaux-Arts architect of the second generation, as McKim had been of the first generation. By 1935, Moore faced several new political, bureaucratic, and aesthetic conditions that affected Washington's public buildings. A Democrat was in the White House, and a majority of Democrats in Congress. New York's Congressman John Boylan chaired the Jefferson Memorial Commission. One of its civilian members was the art historian Fisk Kimball, a leading Jefferson scholar whose role as activist historian, knowledgeable about architecture, challenged Moore's supremacy in that position. The National Capital Park Commission was founded in 1924 to develop parks and recreational facilities. When it was renamed the National Capital Park and Planning Commission 2 years later, its purview was extended to planning for Washington's parks and transportation systems. In 1935, civil engineer Frederick A. Delano, Franklin Roosevelt's uncle, was the Planning Commission's chairman. Colonel Ulysses S. Grant III was its executive officer, and the tidal basin was under their jurisdiction. Although modern architectural works had been built in America for some years, until the 1930s, Moore had successfully filled places on the Arts Commission with Beaux-Arts traditionalists who believed in carrying out the Park Commission's plan to the letter. Pope's Pantheon became the lightning rod for the modernists because it was so closely tied visually to its Roman prototype and was viewed as such an outdated cliche. Moore was invited to the meetings of both the Jefferson Memorial and Planning Commissions and seems to have attended many, but uncharacteristically did not inform the Arts Commission that he had done so until March 26, 1937, claiming that he expected the project to come before the Arts Commission. The Jefferson Memorial's enabling legislation said that it may avail itself of the assistance of the Commission of Fine Arts, but it did not do so until after it announced in February 1937 its selection of Pope's design at the tidal basin. At their March meeting, the Arts Commission did not approve Pope's Pantheon. An extraordinary internal governmental and public outcry against the design ensued, comparable to what many of us experienced over both the Vietnam and World War II memorials. Evidence so far is circumstantial or contradictory, or happened behind closed doors, but Moore may well have understood perfectly the forces arrayed against the Pantheon and sacrificed his power and at least part of his stellar reputation in order to get a version of McKim's Pantheon built on the tidal basin. The Jefferson Commission claimed no one had objected to Pope's Pantheon until the Arts Commission's September 1937 meeting. Moore had resigned as its chairman 2 days earlier, just a few days shy of his 82nd birthday. FDR had initially been unsure about the Pantheon design until Moore convinced him of its rightness. Moore claimed later that his colleagues changed his mind, but FDR's strong support for the Pantheon was the deciding factor. As the bicentennial of Washington's birth in 1732 neared, Moore, in his various official and honorary positions as one of America's leading popular historians, suggested completing the Washington Monument Gardens as one of the Bicentennial Commission's official projects. Had he been 55 or even 65 rather than 75, we may well have be enjoying beautiful sunsets from its plateau, while its water features would make August days on the Mall a bit more bearable. Moore's biographies of Burnham in 1921 and McKim in 1929 remain important historical resources on America's Beaux-Arts era architecture, but were also written to explain the Senate Park Commission's plan and to promote its completion. In fact, so were most, if not all, of his lectures, articles, and other books. Having once touched a man who touched George Washington seems to have influenced Moore to protect, as he wrote to his former colleagues at the end of his life, the inspired plan of Washington and L'Enfant, who by faith had the assurance of things hoped for and the evidence of things now seen. Thank you very much.